from current events, we'll now pivot to something that could be very much in the near future. There is more and more chatter about Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae exiting conservatorship, returning to the private sector, which, if it were to happen, would represent the largest event in real estate since the Great Recession. That is not hyperbole. It cannot be overstated how important these two businesses are in real estate. The inner plumbing of the mortgage market very much depends on Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae coming in, buying loans from banks, from credit unions, reinfusing them with cash. Then Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae package up these loans, sell them off as MBS. Mortgage lenders being given additional cash to go out and do what they need to do is what allows you and I to be homeowners. Otherwise, if lenders can't lend, we are all suddenly going to be renters, right? So it's incredibly important that there's someone there to take the loans off the books, give them cash, continually cycle through it. The backstory here for some context is 2008, 2009 housing crisis. The businesses were just getting slammed. And what the US government did was they came in, gave a large infusion of cash, almost $200 billion. And in exchange for that, the government got essentially preferred stock. So they took ownership of these two businesses, put them into conservatorship. They were identified as very, very important for the systematic function of the real estate market. If these two businesses were to fail, they could potentially take the whole economy with them. The government said, no, we can't have that. Here's cash. Keep doing what you're doing. We're going to take ownership, which ultimately, fast forward to 2025, has been a home run because the U.S. government has more than doubled their money on the investment, and we're continually being paid back. They send funds, I believe it's monthly, potentially quarterly, but it goes to the U.S. Treasury. So we are continually making money on this purchase, the stock deal going back to 2008. So it's been a great purchase. The question then becomes, well, why sell? If it's going so well, why would the U.S. government ever want to give up on something like this? First and foremost, it was not intended to be a permanent thing. This was very much we're in the midst of a financial crisis. We need to kind of stop the tidal wave of businesses going under. This was identified as a very important cog in the economic system. Let's support them and eventually push them back out into the private sector. So the argument can be made that if you had asked people back in 2008, 2009, how long would it be until we got this off our books? It probably would have been 5 years maybe. So the fact that it's 2025, the U.S. government owns such a large portion of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae is not usually what most people would have said was the initial intent with the deal. The other aspect of it is very risky. So if suddenly there was an economic downturn and a bunch of people were to default and suddenly mortgage businesses dry up, this purchase could go south very quickly. So it's a large amount of money. So it's a large amount of money on the books of the American taxpayer. So it's going well now where the Treasury is raking in monthly fees. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that's always the case. So it wasn't meant to be permanent. It's very risky to put on the backs of the American consumer. And finally, it's worth a whole bunch of money. So the expectation right now is if this were to sell on the market, the value would be somewhere between $250 to $500 billion. And if we're in an environment of we're looking to reduce government spending, we're looking to increase government revenues, well, this would be a great avenue to do it, because if we could sell this off for $250 million, that's a large amount we could put towards the national debt or however else the current administration wants to allocate such funds. So there's a lot of arguments to be made that now would be a great time to kind of offload this. The question then becomes, who's going to be the buyer? And at that dollar amount, it can't be one entity. If we look at kind of the largest companies on planet Earth, let's say it were to sell on kind of the upper end, so it's worth $500 billion. Well, that would make the combination of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae somewhere in the top 20 of all companies on planet Earth in terms of market cap. So it wouldn't be able to be, just one business that were to come in and be able to acquire it. It would be, probably a consortium of, JP Morgans and Blackstones and things like that. So it would be rather difficult to find a buyer. However, that's not to say that it can't be. How does this impact us? Because every story we tackle, we always want to view it from, we want to be informed, but ultimately we want to get smarter, but also we want to make money. So how does this impact us as American consumers? In my opinion, and this is just my opinion because we've never seen this play out before, in the short term, if this were to be sold off, I would expect mortgages to become more expensive in the short term. Long term, probably less expensive. And the thought process behind that is our mortgages are pretty reasonable today because of the backstop of the American government. So right now, if you own MBS on residential mortgages backed by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, if Joe Smith, if you own a package of 1,000 mortgages and Joe Smith is in there and he defaults on his mortgage, the government is guaranteeing that dollar amount. So they will step in, and whatever the end financial loss is on that particular mortgage, they will make the holder of the MBS whole. Okay. The moment you send Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae back out into the private sector and you start to shrink that government guarantee, or especially if you were to eliminate the government guarantee, okay, suddenly that MBS becomes a little bit more risky, right? The government backstop is gone. There's more risk. And if you're asking an investor to take on more risk, what do they want? They want more return. And in exchange for more return, that's going to be, from a consumer standpoint, we are going to be paying more for our mortgages because we now need to compensate the investors. Ultimately, my best guess would be it's going to take some time for this to play out, but the private sector is great at solving problems like this. And ultimately, there would be ideally multiple companies formed to go after privatizing and securitizing mortgages. So multiple companies would be competing to do what basically Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae does right now, guaranteeing loans. And ultimately, ideally, in a perfect world, this competition would then lower prices. So again, my opinion, this is my best guess, but in the short term, after these were to be set sail, adios, government is saying goodbye, I would expect mortgages to be more expensive. However, fast forward 5-10 years, I think the private sector will figure this out and it should be able to drive down prices. So ultimately how this is going to play out, who's to know? We haven't really seen something like this happen. And, especially in my lifetime, I'm not familiar with anything like this where such a large part of the government was kind of severed off and sent off into the private sector. But ultimately, that would be my best guess. But it would be a big deal. So this is something worth keeping your eyes on. Whether or not Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are going to stay within the government regulators and under government control, or if there's a sale to be made, and realistically, how much would we be able to repay the American taxpayer? Is it going to be something like $250 to $500 billion, which in that case, maybe now's a good time to make that sale happen.